One of our key themes for the day has been around how do we create meaningful change for systems, not just one-off projects or opportunities. And one of the most meaningful systems that we have to think about is country systems, and what does the country environment mean for being able to implement meaningful solutions, being able to bring technology into our smallholder farming communities. And so this next session is going to explore some ways that organizations are trying to understand those digital ecosystems at the country level. And so we're really looking forward to hearing what you think and how you've seen the country context inform your work.
Hi, everyone. My name is Shalini Unikrishnan. I'm a managing director and partner with the Boston Consulting Group, where I lead a lot of our global development work, especially in the agriculture space.
Hi, everyone. I am Susanna Horton, and I work at DAI on our Digital Frontiers project, and I'm supporting USAID's rollout of digital ecosystem country assessments.
Hi, I'm Craig Jolly. I'm a data scientist in the Center for Digital Development at USAID, where I am the initiative lead for the digital ecosystem country assessments and working quite closely with Susanna. All right, so hi everyone. As I mentioned before, I'm Craig Jolly. I'm with the Center for Digital Development at USAID, and I'm going to be talking a bit today about what we're calling the Digital Ecosystem Country Assessment, or the Deca for short. But before I get into a lot of details, I want to share a bit of a story to set the stage. So we are currently doing an assessment for the USAID mission in Nepal. And of course, if you know anything about Nepal, it's a place where agriculture is hugely important. The majority of the population is employed in agriculture, but it doesn't have quite the economic impact that it could, because most of what people are doing is subsistence smallholder agriculture. And in recent years, there's been a lot of focus on digital agriculture in Nepal, and there are a lot of tools out there. And in putting together this assessment for the Nepal mission, we really didn't want to focus on tools, we wanted to focus on systems. And so we came in with this intention of really taking a political economy lens and trying to understand the incentives of different actors, including financial service providers, including government officials, including civil society actors, and get a sense of why people are acting the way that they are and where some of the barriers that we see in that ecosystem are really coming from. And I can't summarize all of it. There's a lot there, and we'll have a report coming out hopefully before too long. But when it comes to agriculture in particular, one of the things that we really ended up focusing in on is logistics and trade facilitation, and doing some of these things that don't seem immediately agriculture related or even immediately digital related as a way to boost digital agriculture and boost the economic role of the ag sector in Nepal generally. So from there, zooming back out to the big picture of what the Deca is, it's the first implementation initiative for the USAID digital strategy. And where this came from is when we were writing the strategy, we were always telling missions that they need to engage with the digital ecosystem, they need to leverage the digital ecosystem. And we realized that at some point we need to help them understand what it is that they're dealing with. So the purpose of the Deca is to help missions make informed decisions about engagement with the digital ecosystems in the countries where they're working. And we're looking at three broad areas, which you can see in this beautiful and very complex graphic here. One of these is on infrastructure and access, where we want to understand both how people are able to get online, but what some of the barriers are that they might be facing, whether that's with regard to gender or geography or even digital literacy. Our second big area is around digital society and governance. And there we're looking at this interaction between government and media and civil society in the digital space, and trying to understand issues around things like cybersecurity and privacy and data protection. The third big area, of course, is the digital economy, where we want to understand payment systems and digital finance, but then also how these are working their way into the business community generally through digital trade and e-commerce. And so I mentioned the pilot in Nepal. We've actually got 2 completed pilots in Colombia and Serbia, and we're currently putting the finishing touches on 2 more pilots in Colombia and Kenya. And we're currently putting the finishing touches on 2 more pilots in Nepal and in Serbia. And over the next year, we're looking forward to rolling the Deca out to a larger number of USAID missions around the world. That'll happen in a few different ways, but one of the most exciting from my point of view is a toolkit that we're putting together with standard operating procedures and templates that will make the Deca process easier and more streamlined in the future. And what we really want to do with this is not have it be the USAID secret sauce, but to make it something that's open source so that other organizations can adapt those resources for their needs as well. And so our primary audience is USAID missions, but we really want the Deca to be a resource that's going to be helpful for the broader development community. And so as we go forward into the Q&A, I'd really be interested to hear what features and what elements of something like this are going to serve to make this type of ecosystem assessment useful for the work that you do in your organizations.
Maybe I'll start with one, Craig, just to get it going. How about?
Yeah, hit me.
So one thing I'm curious about is your vision and aspiration for this. Do you see this being used to prioritize and make decisions on the ground on what kind of digital ag efforts to support, or how to set the broader roadmap? Would be good to hear a little bit more about how you see this being used.
Yeah, that's a great question. And of course, with any kind of assessment like this, we're including recommendations to the mission. And we try to give them recommendations that fall into 3 broad areas. The first of these is, we want to encourage the mission to take on new partnerships. And in my mind, this is one of the most useful aspects of this, that we talk to a lot of people, some of whom know USAID really well, and some of whom have barely even heard of USAID. And we want to help offer up these new relationships as people who the mission can collaborate with and partner with in the future. We also have some recommendations that focus on programs. And this is more the kind of traditional thing. These are things that you can do. These are things that you can fund. And where there are particular digital agriculture interventions that seem like they're really poised to make an impact in the countries we're looking at, that's the place where we would recommend things like that. And then another place where we're making recommendations that I think maybe some of the most impactful is thinking about processes. How can the mission do things like adopting digital data collection by default instead of sending people out with clipboards? How can the mission move to working through digital financial channels by default? And so those are things that are not targeted to agriculture in specific, but looking at how do we integrate using more digital and using digital better across the whole portfolio of things that a mission does.
I can ask a question. As someone who is quite intimately familiar with the Deca, but a bit more detail that might be helpful for the broader audience. Wondering if you could share some details on how the Deca looks at a digital ecosystem, a bit more detailed than, say, the 3 pillars, but what types of things does the Deca look for when assessing an ecosystem?
Yeah, I think I knew you were going to ask a hard question, Susanna. I'm trying to think of the best, another axis along which to generalize instead of just giving a list of things. And I think maybe one of the things that we want to look at generally is policies, right? We want to understand what some of the policy choices are that are shaping everything from what kind of digital financial tools are available to, you know, where there are restrictions to free speech online, to, you know, what kind of taxes and fees internet service providers have to pay that are impacting the final price point that users are experiencing. There's a lot of places where policy really shapes the digital ecosystem, and we want to understand what those policies are and also where they came from and how they were motivated. I think another broad category of things that we try to understand across the board is incentives of different actors. I don't think we've talked to anyone in any country who doesn't tell us that they are a cash-based society, as if that's sort of a shocking insight that we've never heard anywhere else. Everybody thinks they're in a cash-based society. And so it's, you know, we need to understand where that's coming from. What are the incentives that people have for doing that? What makes it hard to transition to digital? You know, why might there be a deficit of trust or a deficit of confidence in digital tools? And the answers to those questions aren't the same everywhere, even if the things that they are resulting in look the same on the surface. And I guess what's, you know, whether we're looking at policies or incentives or other things, I think the thing that I always find myself repeating to my team over and over again is, what's the story here? Tell me the story. I want to know who the characters are and what they are doing and what, you know, what the history is of how we got to this point and how things could change going forward. So stories, that's the answer, Susanna, stories.
I completely agree. Right. Hi again, I'm Susanna. Thanks so much, Craig, for giving us a foundation introduction to what the Deca is. I have been very closely involved in the development and piloting of it. And so as someone who sits at DAI, an implementing partner for USAID and other donors, I want to bring that perspective to the panel today. And at DAI, in addition to the Digital Frontiers project, which I'm working on, we also have our Center for Digital Acceleration that designs and deploys innovative, user-centered digital tools to drive change across emerging markets. And understanding digital ecosystems is truly at the core of our work. And so from my experience on the Decas and my perspective at an implementing partner organization, I want to share 4 key points when thinking about digital ecosystem assessments. And so the first, keep the linkages between the digital ecosystem and users. As we look to assessments like the Deca to deepen our understanding of the whole ecosystem, it's important not to lose sight of the individual user. So for example, to tell another story about Nepal, as we know, a very agriculture-dependent country, the Deca revealed that increased connectivity perhaps has the potential to improve productivity and make digital agriculture solutions more widespread. However, focusing solely on finding ways to improve connectivity is really a one-dimensional solution. Finding ways, for example, to improve connectivity and farmer digital literacy could magnify impact. And so taking this approach that's ecosystem level, also user level, is important. Another quick example from the Colombia Deca. In Colombia, there's an effort to transition coca farmers to be coffee farmers. And leveraging digital tools to help deliver agriculture extension services is surely an opportunity there. Again, understanding the high-level capacity of the digital ecosystem, things like connectivity or digital financial inclusion for those populations is important, but also understanding nuances for the user. For example, in Colombia, trust issues came to light as being more important due to the post-conflict context. So these holistic approaches, when bottom-up user insights are linked with top-down ecosystem insights, are important when thinking about digital ecosystem assessments. My second point here, create cost-effective, efficient ways to understand the digital ecosystem. So it's no simple or cheap task to assess an entire ecosystem. However, designing structured frameworks and sharing them, and as Craig mentioned before, making them open source and usable by many stakeholders in our community is a way to combat those challenges. And so in thinking specifically in the context of the Deca, the first thing that came to mind here is the many learnings that we had when COVID hit. We shifted from traveling to countries for a few weeks to doing them completely remotely, but actually experienced a lot of success. And that's one way to share this more cost-efficient version in doing ecosystem level assessments. Which brings me actually to a point that I think I would be remiss not to mention on a panel like this with actors from representing a wide array of international development organizations, which is the last digital principle for digital development, be collaborative. So working across the sector to share insights, to share assessment models with each other as we aim to work with the ecosystems where we work. Then third, encourage digital self-reliance. As we understand ecosystems, we're in a unique position to share back our insights with local stakeholders, whether it be governments, mobile network operators, technology firms, or even more local level users and project participants. So sharing back insights that help them fill gaps and meet opportunities with the support gained from these assessments. And then finally, lastly, emphasizing the responsible use of digital technology. So to begin to become full circle, thinking back about the user and the ecosystem level insights, it's important that we encourage and model the responsible use of digital technology at all levels. And so digital ecosystem assessments perhaps can open the door to making important cross-sectoral connections. So while it might be relevant to go dive deep on the agriculture sector, learnings on an agricultural digital assessment can be shared across with other sectors when doing a holistic approach. And thank you.
So hi, Susanna, I've got a question. Your first point on your slide was about maintaining this focus on individuals when you're trying to understand the ecosystem. And of course, the typical research approach for this involves reading a lot of reports that were written by different organizations. It involves talking to people who are experts in the field. How do you get that user perspective and really understand how things are impacting individual people as opposed to just getting that 30,000-foot view?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, truly, I think when I was thinking about getting ready for this panel, one question that came to mind is, what is one of the bigger limitations of assessments like these? And I think it can be hard to get that individual level perspective. But that's where, for my opinion, doing these assessments, it's important to identify the right people to speak to. And as you're identifying them, thinking about what their motivations are, what levers they are pulling within the digital ecosystem, and at what level they engage with that individual perspective. And so just understanding what, I guess, lens is put over that individual connection. The other layer I would add is something we were able to pilot in the first 2 Decas, was this nationally representative data polling survey to attempt to fill that gap. And so actually getting responses from individuals across a country to represent that individual perspective was a way to fill that gap. Of course, it has to be targeted, it has to fit into the project assessment work plan, but as a way to deepen that individual perspective, that is an option.
Great. Susanna, that was really interesting. Maybe one question for you as well is if you could reflect a little bit on the role as you think about these ecosystems of digital agriculture. There's some digital enablers that are needed. There's some agriculture enablers that are needed. And then, Craig, as you pointed out, there's some enablers that are even beyond those that may be needed for it to succeed. How do you think about in this work and your reflections on the meaningful policy and regulatory context that's needed and how to foster that?
You mean in fostering the I guess enabling policy environment? Yeah. Yeah. I think in terms of this, of course, it probably depends country by country. But the Deca in this situation might be unique in the fact that it is, at least at this point, being done by USAID and for USAID missions. And so in certain countries, the USAID and the USAID mission might have that influence with important policymakers. And so identifying what gaps different stakeholders are able to fill. So whether you're looking at it from a USAID perspective and they can work closely with certain policymakers, or if you are another donor, or even if you're a private sector actor doing an ecosystem assessment, looking at where your points of influence are, whether they be small or big, local level or federal level, but looking at how to use those.
Great. I wanted to share a little bit, as I mentioned up front, I work with the Boston Consulting Group, and we collaborated and worked with the Gates Foundation on their systems analysis and investment design framework. And really the starting point was thinking about the need for a common understanding of the digital ag landscape, of the agri-stack, the most impactful investment areas for better donor and partner coordination in this space. So the work that we set out to do with the foundation had the core objective of building a framework and equally importantly, a pragmatic set of tools that would enable stakeholders in a country to determine their digital agriculture agenda and priorities. So part of the design of the framework and the tools, and I'll talk a little bit about what the toolkit has as well, was to, as some of our, Mrs. Hannah and Craig, you pointed to as well, is to facilitate that discussion in country of what matters and how to set that agenda and how to prioritize. Because what we see in this landscape is, there's a rapid increase in the number of digital for ag solutions. It's kind of gone 10 times increase in the last decade. There's only about 15 solutions or so out there that have more than 1 million users, and those make up 70% of all of the for ag users. So there's a lot of activity. It's not always even. But there's also a lot of options of different levers to pull and different areas to invest in to make that system work. And that could be in the at the solutions level and advisory extension services, or smart farming, or climate smart farming, or supply chain management, ag intelligence, etc. It could be in the digital stack itself and the user-facing layer, or the integration layer, or the data content layer. Or it could be in the enabling environment. We've talked about how there's quite a diversity of actions needed there as well. So in the context of so many places and so many things that could be done, the purpose of this effort was to create a set of tools that help make some trade-offs and help make some choices of what to prioritize. And we had a series of discussions with stakeholders across the international community and in country, and we heard a few bits of feedback. One was to be pragmatic and actionable, that too many efforts were conceptual, and folks wanted things that were not sort of stuck in the weeds but could help make choices. We heard the feedback and about leveraging ongoing work. And then a couple of the principles that we knew was going to be really central to building this is a systems view, and for it to be anchored in inclusive agricultural transformation. So it's not digital ag for digital ag's sake, it's digital ag that supports the broader impact agenda in agriculture, inclusive agriculture transformation. So not to get too much into the weeds in the short discussion, but at the top line, what we've worked on developing is a starting point, is a common framework with which to talk about the starting point of a country. So a single page map that lays out the components of a digital ag ecosystem and allows for an assessment and a comparison based on exemplars of where that each component is on a maturity curve to get a strong sense of what that starting point is. B, there is a menu, a global menu of options of what could be pulled, a list of 40 or so that represent a global menu of options, but then a mapping of those options to their dependencies, which has been a really core part of understanding how to do prioritization, which is which enablers need to be in place for that solution to actually be able to succeed. And we used exemplars and interviews and so on and data to understand what is the data behind the impact and feasibility of each of these different levers that could be pulled, and what enablers do you look out for in a country. So if there is an emerging enabler, what are the kinds of solutions that it opens the door to? And if you don't have certain enablers, what are the kinds of solutions that are not worth trying? And so in that context, we built a series of sort of 14 profiles of countries and are testing and pressure testing this framework to see the kinds of priorities it identifies at the end and going through the process. How does that resonate? How does that help make some choices, et cetera, in this space? And I'd like to close with maybe similar to Susanna, where you were going to share a few insights, just from looking across 14 countries and building these priorities. A few things we observed in the space in general. I talked about the difficulty in achieving scale. The other thing that we observed is that most successful models have not focused on small scale producers. They've in fact had to migrate, even when in a couple of cases where they started with a focus on small scale producers, they've had to migrate to medium scale producers or B2B business models. And so that raises a whole set of questions of how do you support and enable these models to actually work for small scale producers. We saw that some of the successful options connected the digital and the physical. So they weren't purely digital solutions. They looked at last mile connectivity through the human agent, which is important for mitigating trust issues and enabling higher uptake and facilitating scale for solution providers. And then we saw the importance of the identity layer, the payments layer, the importance of the government's role in data digitization and discoverability. And then finally, one key piece that we saw across the solutions was you start to see an overemphasis on certain solutions and an underemphasis on others. And it starts to reduce the incremental impact of some of the solutions because there's so much activity in certain spaces versus other spaces. So at a broad level, we saw that certain productivity focused measures were sort of overutilized in some places, which meant that the incremental productivity solution relatively was not having as much value and is unlikely to have as much value. Whereas market-based solutions, market linkage-oriented solutions were actually sparse and not as well developed, which meant that a lot more of them in our impact and feasibility scoring started to come out as interesting and priority areas to focus on. So that's a brief summary of sort of the effort that we took forward, and I'm happy to dive in where it's helpful.
So Shalini, that was fascinating. Thank you so much. I have two questions. One of them is probably easier than the other. I'll start with the easy one.
I'm scared.
Is this framework or this resource for digital agriculture assessments, is this something that you've published or that you're planning on publishing?
So I think the foundation's, the Gates Foundation's intent is very much that it becomes a framework that is widely available, is open source, is something that everybody uses and builds upon. So I think the intent is absolutely to share it far and wide. We're just wrapping up the work, so there may be a little bit of finishing elements to do, but it's definitely the aspiration is that a wide group of folks use it and leverage the content that's been created.
Great. And my other question, and this is maybe a more interesting question, it sounds like this exercise you're describing of bringing together a bunch of shareholders to sort of collaboratively hash out an understanding of where a country is in their digital agriculture maturity and where they're aspiring to go. It sounds like the success of that is going to be really dependent on having the right mix of people in the room and making sure that you have, the right folks at the table, so to speak. First of all, who do you think is the right group of people to invite to something like this? And what are some strategies you've found for getting buy-in from the right group of people?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the ambition really is that instead of an analytical output that says, here's the right answer for digital ag, it's a co-created output. Now, of course, a co-created output should have an underpinning of analysis and content and fact base. So that usually is helpful and important. And one of the things we've tried to do in that is create that organizing framework that and a sort of very step-by-step process of the kinds of data to look for, the kinds of information to look for, etc. The other piece that we think helps facilitate that discussion, because it's multiple perspectives coming in, is also the use of exemplars. So one of the streams of this was looking at what has been the experience, what things came together, what things happened in certain places where elements of the digital ag ecosystem are working or are advancing fast. And so that gives inspiration. So it's analytics and inspiration is sort of the input going into the discussion. And then, as you said, it's really about making sure that a broad range of perspectives is at the table. So the government to begin with, from senior folks to kind of a cross-governmental coalition of folks that feel that are responsible and accountable for the implementation of not only agriculture and kind of those streams, but also the ones that are responsible for the development of and policies around broader enablers, whether those be digital enablers, but some of the economic enablers around financial inclusion, for instance, are really relevant here as well. So creating a broad coalition from the government side, folks from the international community, the donor side, et cetera, that may be funding these efforts. And then also, as Susanna, I think you pointed out earlier, some of the kind of perspectives from the field, if you will. Sometimes those could be cooperatives, those could be folks that are running innovative digital ICTforAg solutions. So we found it really helpful to talk to some of these innovators who could share stories about, well, I started out with smallholder farmers, and here's the constraints I faced, and here's why I had to shift my business, etc. So it's a private, public, social sector mix to be brought in.
Great. I also found your talk really fascinating and would love to eventually see more details on the model. And also have two questions, one being quite easy, I think. The first one is, in building this framework, who is the imagined end user of the framework? Is it like program implementers on the ground? Is it higher level donor people or in-country Yes, end user question.
It's a great question. We actually debated that a little bit because we saw different use cases for it. Would it be a high-level audience that is not going to get into the weeds of the specific levers and specific types of solutions? They're not going to look at the 40 list of the 40 and the enablers and work through all of that, or is it people who are experts in the field? And what we've tried to do is create a little bit of a choose your own adventure type of model. Supporting this, for instance, is a maturity framework that clusters countries on a continuum of where they are in their digital ag journey. So if it's a very high level audience, they could start there, understand the generalities of where the country may be rather than the specificities. So we've tried a bit to build a little bit of, if you are using this framework to do X, start here. If you're using it to do Y, start there type of piece. But we do need to go out and test it and really, we've done 3 deep dives to pressure test a bit, but we've got more testing to do to make sure it works that way.
Great. My other, perhaps more complex question that I'm thinking about, especially in the rollout of the next round of Deca pilots, we've been looking at doing them in more complex situations, so post-conflict or humanitarian assistance, heavy countries. And as you were talking about prioritization of digital ag interventions, I really grapple with that in my head. Like, how do you prioritize where to start with an intervention when so many things are hard to do, especially when reaching the last mile or those smaller farmers where you mentioned it's just harder to do. So I'm wondering how you built out that prioritization model of types of interventions or changes that need to happen.
Yeah, it's a really good question, Susanna. I'm not sure I have an answer. Like you said, it's a complex, complex question, but maybe a reflection on it is, I think as we thought about the maturity, the digital ag maturity, if you will, of different countries, we found that there was a cluster of countries that were sort of, we called it stage 1, if you will. And they were where the digital ag ecosystem was quite nascent, where the enablers were quite nascent, etc. So if you have a context that is in that way, we found that there's not a whole lot of digital ag solutions that actually are impactful, even in that context. There are some, but not the menu of options is not as long. And in fact, one hypothesis that emerges from that is that a focus on creating an enabling environment might be the right place to focus on the general mobile connectivity, general advancement of the business environment, etc., might be the first step before worrying about GIS systems or geospatial mapping and so on and so forth. So I think one of the things that we took away from this, and conflict cases may be similar in that way. One of the things we took away is there is a temptation to think about it as, we've got this toolkit, let's go use it. But there may be places where, we are better off being much more focused in the kinds of tools we deploy and using the energy to build a broader enabling ecosystem to allow for that transition to the next stage where more solutions and more scale is possible.
Thank you all for joining. We are so glad that you were able to participate in that conversation. Looking forward to continued discussion on the community boards. Next, we're going to have you move back into plenary and join the rest of your colleagues from the other breakout sessions there and continue the conversation. Thank you.
Because I think ICT4Ag is one discipline or one area which is pretty much is evolving, right? So this is science that's being made as we speak, and I feel very privileged that we as a community of people are actually defining this space. We are kind of riding the cusp, and we are kind of creating a lot of the standards, and we are laying down the path of how this area is eventually going to evolve and start impacting smallholder farmers in particular in a very big way, and thus help the world at large address a number of the sustainable development goals.
At the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, ICT4Ag is a key part of our overall strategy. We have a team called Digital Farmer Services, and we see digital as a way to accelerate inclusive agricultural transformation. We focus on different aspects of the digital farmer services spectrum, from ag advisory to insurance, to finance, market linkages. We also look at the broader digital agriculture ecosystem, which I think is an important part of why we're here at this conference, is to have a coordinated approach to how do we scale these systems, how do we reach the millions of farmers that we need to reach through digital.
For us, we think to use the ICT will help us also to help FAO to provide the better nutrition, better productivity, a better environment, and a better living standard for smallholder farmers and family farmers, and also to better provide the technical support to FAO's members.
So for the World Bank, what ICT4Ag represents is really charting the course for the next years of our engagement with our clients, promoting digital methodologies and also disruptive agri-tech innovations, in which we can collaborate with local innovation entrepreneurs, youth, agri-tech startups, all these people who can bring new life, new blood, passion, and innovation in how our food and agriculture system should go in the future. So we look forward to connecting with you. We look forward to collaborate with you, and yeah, come and let's change the course of the system together.
Hi, I'm Angela Pashayan. I'm an intern at USAID in the Inclusive Development Division under Meredith Soul. And food security, to me, means when we are able to have food delivered in crisis, in COVID situations or other pandemics, to places that look like this, the informal settlements in Africa.
Resiliencia en la agricultura, creo que la entendí. Creo que ese es un tema de mucha actualidad donde creo que cada día es de más aprendizaje, porque creo que nosotros los humanos hemos dañado la naturaleza y creo que ahora la naturaleza está cobrándonos factura. Tenemos que prepararnos mucho para hacer agricultura resiliente. Ese es un tema de mucha actualidad.
What does food resilience mean to me? It means that waking up in the morning, I don't have to think about whether I'm looking for food or not. I mean, it's just there. I don't have to think about it. The food is always available. Thank you.
Of not worrying about food. And I really love these kinds of conversations because you see so much creativity in addressing food security around the world, and how so many different areas utilize similar strategies, but also very different strategies to really respond to their specific population targets. And I think it's a very sad issue, but also a very beautiful solution-based issue that a lot of people are working towards. I think it's incredible, like coalition of individuals.
Je pense que c'est la capacité d'avoir un accès aux aliments de meilleure qualité et de manière durable. Ça, je pense que ça, c'est la sécurité alimentaire. Avoir accès aux aliments de meilleure qualité, n'est-ce pas, et de manière durable. Je pense que c'est ça ma compréhension de la sécurité alimentaire. Merci.
This April, we launched the USA Digital Strategy, which applies to all of USA programs and sectors and regions around the world, including agriculture. So when you have a chance, please go check out the USA Digital Strategy.
And please remember to go to the topic-specific community discussion boards and start your topic or engage with others.
Don't forget, you can also reach out to people one-on-one using the direct message function.
Hi, everybody. Don't forget that we have session chats where you can post your questions and communicate and connect with other participants throughout the day.